Hi, Volker.
Good to see you.
Hey, Dani. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Fine. Very nice. Nice you're with us.
Yes, same here. Glad I can join.
Ja, super. That's super. Max, hi.
Hallo. Wie geht es? Du bist ja in Siegen, an der Uni.
Ja, in der Uni.
Hast dich reingeschlichen.
Ja, wir machen eine Online-Tagung, aber da muss man ja immer, das ist ja gar nicht so einfach, die zu machen, kann ich dir sagen.
Ich hoffe, ihr habt das Buffet vor Ort.
Ja, ich hab was zu essen bei mir.
Sehr gut.
We should speak in English, I think. There are so
that's
many
better.
people with us. Hi, Jingjing.
Hi, hello.
Lance, hi. Alan.
Hello, Volker, Danny, Alan, hello.
Nice. How is Seattle? Are you all living in a free republic now?
No, but our kid is halfway living there.
Oh, nice. Oh, very good. And is it lovely? Is it flower power?
Yeah, no, it's not quite 1968.
Okay.
That's good.
Yeah, no, it's crazy here.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's, yeah, must be. Huh?
Yeah, we don't know if we're coming to Berlin, but I think if we could just get to Berlin, I would be happier.
Yeah, are you thinking that way?
Yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I see. Yeah, nice. I think we wait up to 35, and then we should start. We should start with a discussion, with a panel.
Can I ask a logistical question? So,
yes, please.
If I want to share my screen, I just click on share screen.
Hi, Yuuki.
I would click on share screen and then get to select my presentation, I assume. But then do I have to put my presentation into full screen mode so that you guys can see it?
Hello, do you want to try it?
Try.
Maybe I do.
Daniela.
Yeah, you are close.
Yeah, it'll work better if you put it into full screen mode, but either way works.
Okay, so I would, I have one participant can share at a time. Okay, so I just share mine.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, you need to click. Yeah, that's okay.
Perfect.
So what did you click?
I clicked on full screen mode.
Full screen mode, okay, that's good to know because it zoomed zoom out when I did so.
Okay, I will go back, sorry, and then I will stop sharing. Yeah. Right, thank you for letting me try.
Bye.
Yeah, super. So we know that it works. Great. Great, super. Yeah, super. So, yeah, so maybe we should slowly start. So welcome everybody to our panel on surveillance capitalism. In a way, and I'm extremely happy that that this panel is happening because we had a similar panel set up at CHI this year, and CHI unfortunately it didn't happen, and they even didn't move into the virtual space. So so our nice idea to make the US community aware of this topic and discuss with us somehow didn't really work out. So so we are super happy that the organizers of this conference, Gunnar, Claudia, and Alexandra, have made it possible to run the panel, and they were even so kind to give us 90 minutes instead of 60 minutes. So so thanks very much to the organizers of ECSCW. I should say, and thanks also to the panelists, specifically to Lance, because I know that Lance is here before his first coffee, and he that's quite a little bit of okay, with the first cup of coffee. Okay, thanks anyway, Lance and Alan, because for you it's really early in the day. This panel is really a topic which is close to my heart in the last years, and Because I personally think that the computing industry is really taking a pretty bad turn in the West, but also in China. And it is turning into an industry which is developing infrastructures for surveillance and manipulation. And I think this development is super problematic. It will, from my point of view, destroy liberal democracies as we know them in the West, and it will have a pretty negative impact also on developments in other parts of the world. This is not happening, of course, in a context-free environment, but it happens in an environment where marketing and targeted marketing is a holy grail of capitalist accumulation, and that has something to do that people maybe don't need to consume as much as they ought to consume to keep the machine running. So we are in a really tricky, interesting situation, and to discuss this tricky, interesting situation, I'm extremely proud that I've got some of the most thoughtful and brilliant scholars on this topic here in this panel, and I will briefly introduce them to you, and then each of them will give a 5 minutes max presentation of its point of view. I will start in the order I have asked the people to speak. I'll start with Alan Warning. Alan is a computer scientist with a degree from Stanford University, who all his professional life was really thriving towards looking at the positive social role of computing in the development of people, their practices, and local communities. And so now he's a professor emeritus of the University of Washington. So so very, very kind. And I can say that without Alan, this panel would not have happened, because Alan is the person who makes makes out of my disorder order in this a little bit also political activity. So thanks for that very much, Alan, anyway. The second scholar I would like to introduce to you is Max Becker. Max Becker is a full professor at the Leibniz University in Hannover. Max comes out of Siegen, and he's maybe in Germany the most interesting legal scholar who is interested in topics of surveillance, of IT law, of privacy, and things like that. So Max, we are extremely happy that you're here and that we will get a legal point of view from you. Third, I'm happy to have Yuuki Hara here. Yuuki is a senior researcher at Hitachi. She's an ethnographer, even an ethnomethodologist by education and conviction. And she's bringing this deep understanding of social practices into the operations of a big infrastructure company of Hitachi. And Yuuki will give us her view, the view of a rather traditional Japanese company on what is going on with the global computing industry. So next will be Jingjing Liu. Jingjing, I know Jingjing since a long time. Jingjing is maybe I could say she's a PhD student in Siegen, but that is not representing her very well. Jingjing is probably the best informed person about political and economic developments in China that I know, at least. And she has written a wonderful thesis and a couple of very, very influential and bright papers on migrant workers in China and on German-Chinese SME cooperation, and she, as I said, she's very well informed about what is going on in the IT industry in China, and she will bring some of her insights here to the panel. And we also need to add that it's not so easy for Chinese scholars. Daniela will agree to that probably nowadays to speak frankly about the situations over there. So so we will always be careful of what to be said in public and what cannot be said in public. Second last is Daniela Stockmann. Daniela is a full professor at the Hertie School in Berlin. Daniela is I know her from her work as a China studies person. She did very interesting work on the effect of social crediting and things like that on the life of Chinese people, and we are very interested in your point here. And I know nowadays you look more at fake news and opportunities to regulate these things which happen in social media platform. And last but not least, Lance Bennett. He's maybe the most senior and best established of us all political scientists and communication persons with a strong tendency towards political activism, and we're very proud that you stood up that early to be with us. Thanks, Lance. So we start with Alan. Alan, please give us your view on surveillance capitalism and what can be done.
All right, well, thank you. Hello, everyone. So let me share my screen. Okay, so is this working? Yeah, okay. So surveillance capitalism is a term coined by Shoshana Zuboff, who wrote a book called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. We actually started talking about this earlier, but we didn't have such a good name, and so we adopted that one. So it's the business model used by Facebook, Google, Twitter, and so forth, and it's based on intensive gathering and cross-correlation of personal information. So the product is behavioral futures. What are people going to do? What are they going to click on? What are they going to buy? And the customers are the advertisers. Zuboff in her book talks about the companies that are offering services at no cost to the end user, or at least no monetary cost. We're broadening it to include companies like Uber and Spotify that charge, but still gather lots of personal information. Spotify is interesting in particular in that it's a Swedish company, so this is not simply a US issue. And they market themselves as selling insights into the emotions of their listeners, based on what music you're listening to. So there are some benefits from this model. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, as the saying goes. So it enables these corporations to provide services at no monetary charge to billions of people, literally. And there's a whole range of dazzling technology developments. But there's a very dark side. And I've listed this whole set of things. And I think I'm going to not go through every single one, but I'm going to let them come up in the panel. But basically, we're supporting surveillance by corporations in the state, undermining the basis of democracy, encouraging consumerism and overconsumption, a whole list of things. Okay. So we, of course, need to connect with the pandemic. So there are, again, some benefits in terms of tools that avoid social isolation, that allow us to remain employed, connected, and so forth. I think as a prediction, though, the technology companies are going to use the pandemic to shore up their reputations. They were starting to take a big hit, but we're seeing lots of cases of trying to put a positive spin on it. One interesting one in particular is regarding cell phone tracking data. So there are these tracking apps that get, or tracking APIs that get inserted in lots of things on your phones. And it's really rather disturbing because we don't usually consent to this. It just happens. But I see these deployed as, look at this really interesting data from all the college students who are at Fort Lauderdale, and look where they went, as opposed to, look at all these people who are being tracked that didn't know they were being tracked. We'll also probably be talking about the misinformation that comes from Facebook and other sources, and there's of course a pandemic of misinformation going on as well. So what to be doing? I think the steps toward the solutions, I think, need to include education, regulation, and even resistance. This is going to be a familiar theme to ECSCW folks. We want to do this kind of co-design of both technology and regulation. So rather than just seeing regulation as catching up, we might design the technology at the same time as regulation. For example, APIs that allow multiple social media services to interoperate, along with true data portability, where you can pick up and move to somebody else. Another purpose of regulation is to challenge the business model, the surveillance capitalism business model. So lessen the worst aspects of the economic incentives, and also foster alternate models such as nonprofits, a publicly supported version in some cases, and so forth. Europe seems like a good place to start. It's going to be much harder to do that in the US. Okay, so last thing I want to mention is, are we talking about this enough in PI and CSCW? And the answer is, I think, no, there's this deafening silence. Well, why is this hard? So the easy answer is money, but it's not just that. Our communities are deeply engaged with these companies. The fruits of human-computer interaction research play a fundamental role in developing the systems that Facebook and so forth are using. Their researchers are integral parts of our community. They serve on the program committees, referee papers, write important articles. For university faculty, we get money, internships for students, jobs, and so forth. Just for myself, for example, 3 of my PhD graduates have worked at Google, 1 at Facebook, 1 at Amazon, 1 at Microsoft Research. So that it's not just, and I've gotten grants from Google. So, but it's not just the money. It's really a whole network of social ties. But these discussions are essential. As Volker mentioned, we tried to put this CHI 2020 panel together. And we tried to set the stage with this subtitle, Civil Conversation Around a Difficult Topic. We didn't get any panelists from the companies, though. They were all academics and somebody from Mozilla, so that is hard to do. What I hope is that we can enlist at least some of the researchers and developers as allies in addressing these problems, rather than just saying, you're doing something wrong. I think companies like Google and Facebook can be remade. They're going to be way less profitable and smaller. But for example, Google could be more like it was before surveillance capitalism and offering search services for a fee. And I'm hoping, I don't think the stockholders are going to go for this, but I'm hoping a lot of the rank and file folks can say, we agree, we got to do something about that, and we'll help from the inside. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Volker, du hast das Mikro noch aus.
Oops, sorry for that. Thanks, Ellen, very much for your kind presentation and interesting. Are there very quick questions or remarks following up on Ellen? If not so, I would like to ask Max Becker to give us his perspective from a German European legal scholar. Please, Max.
I'll have to share my screen. Wait a minute. Here we go. Does this work?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. And I like to. It's more like an introduction in the legal environment, or what I'm gonna do. And we can go into the details later. I'm not an expert in US law, but I think it's important to see the difference between the US and the EU system here. the legal system, because surveillance capitalism originates from US companies and is closely entangled with the US legal system. So it's important to see some of these differences. First, in the USA, privacy is mainly protected via tort law, the so-called four torts, which has nothing to do with data protection law. And there's no comprehensive data protection law in the United States, as far as I know. There are only state laws. Some of them are rather strict, like the Californian CCPA or the Illinois Biometric Information Privacy Act. The decisive point seems to me that the First Amendment protects the freedom of speech, which involves that information is generally free. And once information has been disseminated, it must be not withheld by anyone. And against this background, data protection law is seen as a potential restriction on the freedom of speech. And therefore, some lawyers understand it as a right to have the government stop you from speaking about me, or the European right to be forgotten in the GDPR was deemed to be the biggest threat to free speech on the internet. And one of the deeper reasons for this importance of free speech is, as far as I read, a belief in the power of information and the fear of a government conspiracy in terms of a Big Brother scenario, #deep state. And an unimpeded flow of information should kind of improve citizens' ability to make free and informed choices. Now, to European eyes, data privacy is closely connected to human dignity, and therefore also protected by special fundamental rights, and freedom of speech is regulated much narrower and with more specialized rights. And this freedom of information in the US, combined with a very liberal contract law, seems to be the fertile ground for surveillance capitalism. And as an example, Cambridge Analytica, I read this book from Brittany Kaiser, found that the USA was in particular suitable for this micro-targeting strategy they did, while the European system did not offer the necessary freedom to use personal information. Now, next thing is the international reach of the GDPR. The GDPR has strong global effects one must be aware of. It demands that non-European companies comply with the GDPR, with European data protection laws. And the power to control and enforce this lies in the hand of independent authorities, which do not listen to economic policy or the like. And this kind of recklessness of the European system caused at least some concerns for surveillance capitalists. Third point, the GDPR is sometimes seen as a kind of a favor to big players, because large companies such as Google, Facebook, or Amazon are benefiting relatively from this body of law, because it causes enormous costs for compliance, and smaller companies can't afford, don't have the financial means to comply and to collect data at the same time. So in this regard, it also may be a mixed blessing. Now, my second and last slide, the race for a flourishing data economy. The European Union is envious of the flourishing data market in the USA. Europe wants its own Google, and you can read about this in several communications of the European Union. We want a flourishing data economy. However, Europe prohibited mainly all business areas of Google for European companies. We don't like Google Books, it's a copyright violation. Google Street View is a privacy violation. The same is true for the search engine and targeted advertising, this whole tracker business, and many aspects of the Android system. So additionally, Europe is very angry about the fact that Google is collecting personal data from Europeans while the profits land on the other side of the Atlantic. And this is why Europe didn't decide yet in how far we really want to ban surveillance capitalism for European companies. We have some loopholes in the GDPR to still exploit data, because we know personal data is important for economic issues. And so that's where I came in with a proposition for a right to data avoiding products while opening the market for personal data. But we can talk about this later. Last point, a new kid in town. maybe in a very near future, Google, Facebook, and data brokers will be known as the good old decent surveillance capitalists, because there seems to be a new kind of company that is not afraid of the really dirty work. Most prominently, the company Clearview, which offers a face search engine powered by a database with pictures of 3 billion individuals. And the crucial difference seems to be, in my eyes, that traditional surveillance capitalism is interested in the behavior of recognizable individuals. For example, targeted advertising doesn't need to know your name, address, or picture. First of all, it needs information about your behavior and personality, while biometric surveillance aims at identifying your biological identity. So what does your fingerprint look like, your iris, the geometry of your face, your body measures, your way of walking, or your DNA. And this biological data can hardly be disguised or influenced, and is not only important for economic use, but to a large extent for political purposes. So briefly, this kind of surveillance doesn't monitor personality, but molecules and atoms of the body.
Yeah.
And so, I come to an end. Amazon and Google seem to have stepped back from this kind of business because of ethical concerns, while Clearview is offering its services to countries with clear human rights violations, or for private companies and candidates running for And so the legal problem, and that's it, seems that facial recognition serves the same interests like video surveillance, and is which is permitted for authorities like the police or intelligence agencies. And so this is on one line, video surveillance and facial recognition. So it's hard to separate these two. Now, these were just a few comments from a legal perspective. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Max. Yuuki, give us a little bit of your perspective on these developments in the IT industry. What is a traditional Japanese infrastructure company thinking, and how do you see that developing in Japan?
Okay. Well, in Japan, especially manufacturing company, do you want to need to show the slide, or just
yeah,
answer
please.
the question?
Please,
Okay.
please,
Okay.
please.
Okay. Can everybody see the slides?
No, we can't.
No,
Okay, sorry. All right.
I think you have to click on the share button after you've clicked on your slides.
Oh, okay. After. I
Yeah.
see. Just 1 minute.
First hit share screen at the bottom, then
Yes.
highlight your slides, and then
Okay.
click share. I think it's in the right lower corner.
Like this. Can you see it?
No.
Okay, no. Okay, just let me do it again.
Why don't you make your arguments without sharing the slide, Yuuki?
Okay. Just a
sorry, Yuuki, I can share the slides for you if you like. We
Okay,
have the
thanks
backup
so
slides.
much. Thanks so much.
Okay, let me just briefly pick the slides. Maybe you can begin already, and then I'll.
Okay, so hello, I'm just gonna start conversation. So hello, my name is Yuuki Hara from Hitachi. I'm a scientific researcher in Hitachi. And then, so actually Hitachi has a really huge domain of the businesses, including from like mobility, like smart life, industry domain, energy, IT system. And like for each domain, we develop hardware such as machinery and software such as IT systems and so on. And as for the data, we acquire the data regarding, maybe I should see the slide, but it's not
Okay, I can start now. Just a second.
Oh, can you see the slide?
Yeah, now we have it. Thanks, Claudia.
Okay,
Can you see that?
Okay, so Yes,
Okay.
I see that. So please turn to the next. And then also next.
Mhm.
And then next slide, please. Okay.
This one?
Okay. Yes, thank you. And then as our approach to data-driven businesses is we acquire data such as operational technology, information technology, and the product-related data. And then our approach to data-driven business can be explained as we extract the data from physical spaces, like real world, and such as operation technology and product-related data. And we evaluate and simulate the data as cyberspaces, such as like digital twin.
Yuuki, may I interrupt you? Can you talk either a little bit slower and have your microphone a little bit closer to your mouth or something like this?
Okay.
You're
Okay.
acoustically not perfectly to be understood. Sorry.
Okay. Okay, maybe is this much better?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay, good. And then we get back to the real world operation. So we're going to simulate all the data that acquired from the real world and then try to do the digital twin, such as digital twin, stuff like that. And then you're going to get back to the real world operations. So this is how we do the data-driven businesses area. But next, let me talk about the situation in Japan. Please turn the next slide, please. Japan has a quite similar law to GDPR, like personal information protection law, but many consumers and companies are naive to the risk of data analytics usage and its consequences. I mean, here, the point is naive. It's not like bad actor behavior, but the naive, that's the current risk in Japan, I think. Next slide, please. And then for the consumer solutions, the issues and challenges are need for data ethical knowledge. I mean, in order to make decent judgment, consumer needs to be educated more. And then there was a case of a Japanese startups that they pay people $200 to set up a live 24/7 camera to gather individual personal life data. And the participants' comments are like, I did not know my daily life is worth for money, or I have nothing to hide, but just take care of, I just try to be careful about hiding my password for PC login from the camera. So as this comment illustrates, the consumers are quite naive to the risk of data analytics usage and its consequence. But not only this, but companies are naive too. They actually do not, this startup company does not know what kind of risk they're getting into. So this is kind of the situation in Japan, and maybe I can say almost societal issues, possibly not easily solved. The next slide, please. And then for the workplace solutions, there's 4 different issues. In the workplace, Hitachi gathers data to analyze best practice of operations. But for one, worker does not like to provide their data because they're very afraid of being used against them. So for example, like power control room operations, the operator's expertise knowledge is digitalized. They're gonna think like, do we lose our job or do we lose power or something? And they're quite keen to how digitalization is going to shift the societal order of their workplace. And the second one is actually the worker on site knows the limitation of data analytics. So it's pretty much like, can we really trust the result of the data analytics? For example, like predictive maintenance system for train vehicle maintenance. Like what if we're gonna replace a part and as the system suggested, but the parts would not break. And at the end, we're gonna end it up with like costing much more money. And who is going to take responsibility for that? That kind of thing is like, all these tools are trust type of issues for data analytics. And next slide, please. Other challenges are we need to design balance between data provider and design user, meaning who is winning in data analytics solution world. The most likely, the winner is data user, and the loser is data provider. Likely, most likely. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but but that is not right. I mean, if we would like to have a sustainable business services, we have to have a balance. So we have to design the balance. That's a really important, difficult agenda, but really important. And lastly, what most of our client does not realize is this is really important, but designing the goal of data analytics and AI solutions is the most critical process when designing a solution. So, I mean, I have seen a lot of cases like the project that does not spend enough time to consider the goals and aim of the data analytics solution. Most likely, they ended up unsuccessfully. I have seen that quite a lot. So it's very important, but it's challenging. And lastly, please go to the next slide. I would like to share one case that's possibly we should, that is one of the direction for how do we apply the data analytics businesses. This is one of the examples we have developed, but this is about visualization of a crowdedness of the stations. But as you can see that we draw the personal data from the analysis and only focusing on parameters that are useful for understanding passenger flow and crowdedness in order to achieve the better passenger guidance. So the point is, how can we select the right technology or data analytics technology or algorithm to actually achieve the needs of the consumer and the business stakeholder, but at the same time protect the consumer's privacy and then their rights. So it's pretty much like the point is using the data, it's not maybe bad things, but how do we make use of it is really the point, I think. That's all I want to make. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Yuuki, very much. Questions, reactions to Yuki's talk? If not so, then I would like Daniela Stockmann to introduce us to her work. Daniela, please.
Sure. I hope we're not skipping Jingjing.
Oh, Jingjing. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. If, maybe you start and then Jingjing. Sorry,
okay,
my
fantastic.
mistake.
Right. No
we had a predefined order, which I sort of spontaneous, a little bit moved. But yeah, please, Daniela.
Okay, great. Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So, so as Volker mentioned, my previous work has been on China, but more recently, because I've been working a lot on censorship in China and especially how the Chinese state manages content on social media, I've become very interested in what is happening in Europe, because currently the European Union is making key decisions about where Europe will be heading in terms of governing social media platforms and regulating its content. And so I will be talking about the problem of fake news. I believe many of you have received fake news during the current pandemic, but obviously this is an older problem. And many of you have also received fake news in the context of elections. And so the question is for this panel, of course, where is the relationship to the business model? And so, currently in the public discussion, political motivations are usually stressed. So here you see an example from Germany of a clear case in which fake news was produced by RT and Sputnik, which are Russian sources, and then spread via social media. It's the story here on the right side. You see about a 13-year-old German-Russian girl that was supposedly being raped by refugees in Germany. And this led to Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov here on the left side, accusing the German authorities of concealing the case. And then 700 people demonstrated in front of the German Chancellery. So this is clear evidence of one of those stories that where we can identify and tie back to a Russian source. But when you look into fake news, actually you'll find out that political motivations don't produce the majority of fake news. Most fake news on social media are actually produced for financial motivations. Here you have some examples from the 2016 US elections, produced by some teenagers out of Macedonia, that created websites with names like usconservativetoday.com or usadailypolitics.com, and they posted false stories with headlines such as Hillary Clinton in 2013. I would like to see people like Donald Trump run for office. They're honest and can't be bought. Later on, these Macedonian teenagers were asked, why are your fake news stories predominantly pro-Trump? And then one of them said, and I quote, "People in America prefer to read news about Trump. That's why there is a political bias in our fake news," but they had no political motivations whatsoever. And the reason why, the reason why how these financial motivations are tied to the business model is often the link is often being made via a clickbait phenomenon. Perhaps you have heard about this term before. So what this means is the more often your headlines are being clicked upon on social media, the higher your financial return. And this is related to the surveillance capitalism business model that Ellen has introduced to us earlier. There is a so there's a link here in terms of making users very curious about headlines by producing outrageous headlines and unlikely news stories that then lead to users to click on those news. And even if they later find out that the news were fake, they have already, by clicking on the story, they have already contributed to the financial return of the producer. And so more recently, there has been some discussion about alternatives to the business model here. So the predominant business model currently is, of course, an advertised-based business model. US Senator Elizabeth Warren has been talking about breaking up platforms and to use antitrust law in order to deal with this case. I would say that breaking up platforms is of course not really producing a business alternative, but is of course also a regulatory approach towards dealing with perhaps the possibility of news spreading, not only, let's say, amongst Facebook, but then also being tied to WhatsApp and Instagram, so sort of stopping information flows. But I see some limitations here. In Europe, the prescription-based model is often used as an alternative. So Margaret Vestager, she has been discussing the prescription-based model as a major alternative. One of the biggest disadvantages of this model is that it will lead to inequalities amongst users. So oftentimes opponents of this model argue that it favors people who have the financial capacity to pay subscriptions, and those people who have less financial capacity and are poorer essentially are those that then can no longer use the kinds of services offered by social media platforms. Landwehr, Borning, and Wulf, they have published a paper that I can highly recommend that also discuss two alternatives. One of them is the idea of building cooperatives for platforms. So, here the idea is that users, as a user, you also become an owner of the platform itself. One of the difficulty in terms of implementing this idea is that it's quite unclear what executive powers the owners or users would have once they have made a decision, and other stakeholders, such as, for example, the developers, would not like to implement those decisions. So it's quite unclear what the power dynamics would be here in place. Then another alternative that is oftentimes being discussed is a Wikipedia-like donation-based business model. So as you all know, on Wikipedia, users contribute content freely, and they also edit content themselves on the platform, and the entire platform is being sustained by donations. Here, the biggest disadvantage of this model is, of course, that if you don't find any donors for your idea, or not enough, if you can't crowdsource and find enough donations, then of course you're unable to found your innovation or your product. So, so I have recently come across another idea which I find very interesting as a basis for discussion. It's not yet another idea about how to build business models that are that provide an alternative to the advertising-based business model, but it's the idea of a regulatory sandbox. So what that means is that, for example, in the European Union would create a space for experimentation where companies can test out new products based on new business models within a new regulatory space that is somewhat that provides more liberties, let's put it this way, than they would face under current regulatory conditions. And I personally, as going back to my China expertise, I find that a very promising expertise, because that's exactly how China has been pushing not only market innovation, but also digital innovations by allowing companies to experiment with new products and create sort of these special zones or spaces that then enable experimentation and the creation of new ideas. My personal thinking is that we do need more ideas for alternative business models, and you can follow me and my students regarding how our conversation is going online at digitalservicesact.eu. Thank you.
Dani, thank you very much. Are there reactions, questions to what Daniela said?
So, Volker, I think we're just a little bit into collecting questions.
Yes.
Most of them are more like on a general level. So let's just complete the round and then.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Timo. I should introduce Timo Jacobi, a postdoc here with us in Siegen, who is facilitating the chat channels for us. Thanks, Timo, for that. And I would like to ask Jingjing Liu to give us some thoughts about what she sees happening in China and what can be spoken about. Please, Jingjing, you're muted. You need to unmute. There's a button in the left lower corner. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's my slide. Thanks for inviting me to join this panel. And my topic for today is about China from the internet censor to surveillance mercantilism. The theory of surveillance capitalism can be seen as a description of the social and economic impacts of big data by Professor Shoshana Zuboff from the perspective of critic of political economics. But China has been regarded as a country of socialism in politics, but marketism in economy. So in many ways, it's significant different from the orthodox capitalist society in Zuboff's definition. That's why here I hope my statement could focus more on economic and technological perspectives of internet. So I replace capitalism in the source concepts with mercantilism. First of all, I want to compare internet censorship in the traditional research aspect. I I can't control this speech. I can't move forward my slides. Sorry.
Try changing the focus to the slideshow thing in your computer.
Oh, yeah, right now. Okay. First of all, I want to compare internet censorship in the traditional research aspect and the somehow more up-to-date topic of surveillance mercantilism from the following 5 aspects. Because in instance, all of them are the kind of management and control mechanism of upper to lower based on digital and network technology. Internet censorship is always understood under the frame of political centralization as a kind of ruling methods. Public opinion is controlled by depriving freedom of information. Survey mechanism, just like the name, is kind of centralization mechanism with strong commercial attributes. Professor Zuboff's research objects are the 5 information technology giants like Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft, which she called the Big Other, just like George Wilson's political metaphor, Big Brother. Also in China, we have our own version of this, like Baidu instead of Google, WeChat instead of WhatsApp, or instead of everything actually, and Huawei and Taobao and China Telecom and countless other internet companies which are keeping expanding and increasing really rapidly. Internet censorship aims to find and delete the political sensitive information while the target is preset, controllable, and occurred. The purpose of the surveillance mechanism is to comprehensively record and mining value. The target object is changeable, unstructured, and predictable. In order to understand users as deeply as possible, big data enterprises have invented a variety of surveillance methods, including analyze the user's behavior, the user's position, the user's voice, and face recognition, personality, and even their emotions. The target of internet censorship is the dangerous elements in political sense, including dangerous people and dangerous information. The target of surveillance mechanism is all netizens. The opposition of data means that it has a strong relationship with its producer. Once these pieces of information floating on the network enter the big data system, the first thing activated is the user's identity attributes. Professor Zuboff believes that the totalitarianism of surveillance capitalism is different from the previous and also has different game strategies. In the past, political totalitarianism forced the people to accept rules and further internalize the rules. Terrorism and violence were used to suppress the resistance. Surveillance capitalism is more confusing and flexible. It can shape an undisputed and identical society by means of behavior corrections, making people agree with the technological rationality and the logic of domination. Here, I'd like to show you 2 examples in China during this special time period. The first one is about a story of female doctors. She considered to be the first one to find the coronavirus in my hometown in Wuhan. She made some pictures of the medical record of her patients and tried to spread it to his workmates in other hospitals. And some interview was made with her, and this articles was official online and spread very quickly. But after maybe 3 hours, all the articles was censored. That means vanished on the internet. But people who have already read these articles want to spread this article as wide as possible. So they find different ways to spread it, like to take the pictures of the articles instead of text it. But then maybe less than 5 minutes, all the pictures were censored. From that means all the pictures were removed from the internet. So the people try to instead try to spread this information, they find some different ways and interesting ways, like translated into different languages, or even like this, like Oracle version, and some Morse code versions, sign language versions, and telegraph codes. That's the young generation try to fight against this censorship in China. That's one example. Another example is that the very famous and widely used the Toutiao, today's headlines, news app that successfully cultivate users' strong dependence and long-term immersions. The users have to log in this app through their social accounts like WeChat. That's comparable with WhatsApp or Facebook in European world, USA, which authorize Toutiao to access them and mine personal information as well as social network records, exchange data privacy for more free personalized services. And for the readers who open the app without login, this app Toutiao will recommend hot news first, and then record and analyze users' behaviors, how they click the hyperlinks, which articles where they click the likes or share the pages with friends, how long have they stayed at the pages, and so on, to complete the user's portrait. And who are you determines what's recommended for you by this app. They are doing this by this process, and the first grab hyperlink with web crawler technique, and then classified and source different informations, then obtain an information aggregators distributes information based on algorithm. At present in China, the research on Toutiao shows trends of polarization, information customization, or information narrowing, users' voluntary or users' addictions. Obviously, from Professor Zuboff have a very strong critical attitude towards the rapid development of digital technology. She believes that the high-tech companies like this app Toutiao repeatedly emphasize efficiency, function, and convenience, on which the user attention would only be focused. All of above allow users to willingly give up their digital privacy in order to enjoy the dividend of technology. But I think it's also very important to discuss if it's possible to provide a personalized consulting service for users without knowing them. That's for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jingjing, very much. Are there questions, comments, remarks directly? If not, I would like Lance to give us a little bit of his thoughts, maybe summing up already a little bit what he has heard, and yeah, Lance, please.
Sure. Hello, everybody from wherever you are in the world. It's nice to virtually be here. Sorry we can't meet in person. That's always somehow special, but we try to make this format work. In summary, it's a very interesting panel. I want to say thank you to everyone for your perspectives. I've learned a lot, and I guess what I am most concerned about is that the problems, and I think those problems are well presented by Marvin and Alan and Volker in their paper, The High Cost of Free Services. But my sense is that this long list of problems are very diverse, and that there's no single policy solution that seems to cover them all. So I guess what I would like to see us do in a kind of our next stage of thinking about all of this is to think about a sort of multiple solutions that would involve education, that would involve political movement, and understanding how to organize political movements in different countries with different political and legal systems. There are also legal solutions. And I think there are public policy solutions that go beyond just regulation. I think there are public policy solutions of the sort that also are mentioned in the paper by Alan and Marvin and Volker, such as thinking about communication technologies as public utilities, as the sort of thing that citizens should be provided with in the same way that citizens are provided with electricity and water and sanitation. And that those utilities for communication could be designed with particular values as sort of central to the design process. And here's where we come back to the opening idea of education. So I think that the field, the tech fields in particular, could educate students in how to think about what they're doing. I mean, right now, it's pretty clear that these fields are very popular because they're very profitable. You know, these are the best jobs you can get, really, in today's world. So let me talk about 3 general areas of problems and then come back to this idea of multiple solutions that we might want to sort of organize into some program of action. The first big problem area, I think, is the one that Zuboff herself writes at considerable length about in her book, which is really the moral problem of trying to engineer human behavior on a large scale. That's really what these companies are doing. And you know, this has been a moral concern really since the 1950s, when the American psychologist B.F. Skinner began to think about ways in which you could condition people to behave in terms that you want them to. The question, of course, is what ends are we conditioning people to behave around? And this is where I think, you know, morals and values and ethics need to be really discussed in the educational context. But so the question of is it wrong to condition people really in ways they're not aware of to do things that they may not even understand? But that's a very tricky way to present the problem. I don't think you're going to have lively public debates in the media over the ethics of mass behavior conditioning. So the question is, can we break that down into sets of more sort of tangible and I think easy to present kinds of problems? So one thing is to look at the economics of the tech industries. And those economics are really based on ramping up consumerism. I mean, one of the things that people are being conditioned to do is to consume more. Well, you know, there we have something that we already know has a political foundation to it, because the consumer economy is already the dominant part of economies in most societies on the planet today. And the consumer economy is already killing the life support capacities of the planet. So we know that accelerating consumerism is accelerating the death of the planet itself. And that seems to me to be something worth talking about. So what do you do about accelerated consumerism? Well, at least you can make people aware of it, but you can also do, I think what Alan suggested at the beginning of the talk, which is to regulate the business practices themselves, so that if, you know, it doesn't get rid of consumerism as a problem, but it might at least put it back into a more manageable context, to encourage companies to go back to either selling their services or simply placing advertising in the way it was done before the data exhaust became captured and used so effectively. So the second thing, so there's one whole cluster of issues there that involve the economics, the business model, and consumerism, and really the quality of life on the planet. And there are other environmental impacts of technology, as you all know, server farms and cloud computing and all of those things are represented often as being virtual and green, but in fact, we know they're not. So let me look at one other area, and then I'll wind down and open for questions. The other area is that people are, behavioral engineering is being directed at political behavior in some of the ways that Danny just presented with fake news and so on. But I think that the bigger problem with the political uses of these technologies is that they are driving our public communication underground. They're making much of our political discourse invisible to publics. So since the venue here is located in Germany, I will invoke Habermas and note that if we are really interested in having a kind of a vibrant democracy, we need our communication to be public, to be heard by others, and to be, and this is the weakness of Habermas's position, of course, rational. And much of the conversation that we see today is really based on activating emotions, because this is what these technologies do so effectively, is they activate emotions, and often those emotions are much more important than whatever information is packaged in the communication that is activating them. So we live in political societies. The United States is an unhappy example these days, but in societies in which we are amplifying hate and division and polarization in our communication, and much of that is done in ways that we really don't see. So in the US recently, we've gotten into fights over President Trump's tweets. As you probably have heard, Twitter tagged some of Trump's tweets about misrepresenting voting by mail, by post in the US. Trump then threatened to change the legal status of Twitter from basically a service provider to a publisher. And you know, what that enables is to embroil Twitter politically in a lot of partisan conflict. Meanwhile, Facebook positioned itself differently in that debate by saying, we will not regulate any speech on our platform politically. That is an extremely dangerous position, and particularly since Facebook is moving into becoming an outsource option for political campaigning. So Trump won his election largely thanks to hiring Facebook to run a political campaign. One of the mysteries in 2016 is, how did Trump win without really a political campaign organization? Well, he had, importantly, Facebook among other options.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, can I just suggest two quick ideas here?
2 more points and then we open the floor.
Right. One possibility is we consider the possibility that there's no formal use of these platforms for political purposes. I mean, if people want to share political news among their social networks, that's fine, but to allow parties and politicians and indeed Macedonian hackers access for political purposes, that should be policed. It's possible to police these things. The companies just don't want to do it because it undermines their business model. So a study that might be of interest in Germany is that in a sample of some 80,000 Facebook accounts for the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, something like 40% of those accounts were fake accounts. They were bought and managed by some communication management company somewhere in the world on behalf of the AfD. Now, if a group of my colleagues at George Washington University could detect this, I'm pretty sure that Facebook could have detected it as well. So we can simply require that this kind of monitoring of accounts and their authenticity would happen. And finally, I would argue that we might want to encourage and sort of in the educational side of training students, alert them to the fact that many workers at these companies may be the most effective agents of change. After Zuckerberg announced that he was not going to offer any regulation for political speech on Facebook, a number of employees protested and some even left the company. So this may be an opportunity we could think about for more effective dialogue within the industry itself. So thank you very much.
Lance, thank you very much. Timo, you have managed the chat list. Are there interesting questions you want to throw in?
Yes, and thank you very much. And thank you very much indeed for the questions we got. And thank you very much also, Lance, for summing it up so nicely, such that I was able to kind of structure the questions a little bit, because you brought in the whole body of economic questions around business models. And there we have like two very different stances on the issue, one of which asks like, what do you think, would users be willing to pay like 25 cents for a Google search or €5 for a navigation from A to B? And if not, how should such services be provided and developed in the long term? And a countering question goes more into the very opposite direction, asking whether data provision by individuals could be or should be used to serve as a basis for universal basic income. So two very different approaches on developing the business models. And maybe we could discuss a little bit around what roads we could go down in this direction, or which roads are realistic.
Lance, do you want to start reacting to these questions?
I just have a couple of thoughts on that one. It's a great question. One thing that we've talked about in the group with Volker and Alan and Danny is the idea that yes, you could charge for some of these services, but you could also incentivize people paying for them, a very small amount per search. You could just have an account and so on, by giving their data back and protecting it, not just from use by the company itself, but by third parties, which are now becoming the biggest problem of all in terms of putting together profiles on individuals. So I think that the fee for service model, but it needs to be incentivized politically and legally, because these companies won't do it, given how successful the current business model is. I mean, these are, in the time of COVID, these are the most profitable companies on the planet today.
Yeah.
Maybe I can throw in a couple more thoughts too. So there are a bunch of proposals for people to sell their data and make money at it. I think these are really misguided, that I think there is a moral issue here in telling people, well, sell your private data and then you just get paid for it. It's like saying, well, you could sell people into slavery. It's just, that's pretty extreme, but it's just the wrong approach. Regarding what Lance just said, and Danny also about subscription-based models, it's true, it's really hard to get people to pay for something you can get for free. So having advertising supported services, but where the advertising is not targeted in the same way, like DuckDuckGo is one possibility. And then I think we just need to open things up. In Seattle, there's a thing called democracy vouchers, where I get 4 $25 coupons I can give to political candidates for their campaign. And suppose you had social media vouchers or search vouchers or something like that. Or suppose that university libraries, as part of the library service, contracted with a search company to provide that. So there may be other ways than just saying, well, pay €15 a month for your search. If I can throw one other thing in, I admit this is completely messing up the question order. But I saw a question a while ago of why did you have such a leftist title for this panel? And let me address that one. So we actually tried to have a very neutral sounding title for our Chi panel. And the reviewers came back and said, gee, the topic, the substance of this proposal is really interesting, but we had no idea what you're talking about from the title and nobody's going to show up. With this title, people know what we're talking about at least. I guess another reaction we got from one of the people in the companies was, well, I'd like to come to a panel about behavioral economics or something like that, but I don't want to talk about, political agendas. But the problem is this is a moral and a political question. It's not just a question of behavioral economics. So that's why the title is the way it is.
Yeah, I would like to bring up another issue. So far, we have spoken about the use of the data accumulated in these platforms for political or economic purposes, but there is also the dimension that state security is accessing this data and somehow exercising another level of control and potential manipulation or manipulative forces on people living in countries. Jingjing, one of the ways, which is not even state security, but general use of data from platforms by the government, and Dani, I know you worked about it too. Can you comment a little bit on the social crediting points in China and how they relate to the platform economy over there?
For example, in China, that's people use WeChat, and it's kind of platform for everything, like replacement for Facebook, Twitter, and also a replacement for payment right now in this special coronavirus time. And I think the people have no any other choice to use other apps or use other ways to enter, for example, a shop or a supermarket, or go get on the bus in this very special time, because everyone has to be treated because of this disease. And I think it's at one hand it makes some profile to the society, because the disease was really get controlled under these methods, and people get a lot of convenience. So I think it's on one hand, it's really important for the people to get these methods. But the other side, there is no privacy at all. For example, during the last 3 days in Beijing, someone was found affected by this disease, and now over 350 persons was tracked that was been getting contacted with this market, because this virus was found in a special market in Beijing, and all those people were getting located and will be tested in the next few days. So there was always advantage and disadvantages, in my opinions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Dani, do you want to say something about the social crediting point systems? To what extent it is related to this type of data-driven business models?
So the social credit system in China has obviously received a lot of attention in the news outside of China, but less so in China, interestingly. And a lot of the information outside of China is not entirely correct. So even though the Chinese government has indeed created a plan for a social credit system that allows people via commercial and also non-commercial outlets the ability to apply for loans as an alternative to the banks. The social credit system then ties your score to apply for the loan also, among other things, to your what's called the social credit, to your social media scoring. And of course the extent to which you're censored could be figuring into your social credit score. But we don't have any concrete evidence for this being the case. There is currently, when you look at the social credit system in practice, even though the government obviously intends to create a national system, in practice there are eight commercial experiments out there, and Sesame Credit by Alibaba is the one that is mostly used the most widespread. And currently, according to developers in China, it's impossible to merge these 8 different types of data with each other. So at the moment, this idea of the big brother vision of China, of the big brother, the central government being able to check everything I don't see this happening right now, although of course Beijing is very much aware of the problem and is also dealing with it. But at the moment, even though I agree with Jingjing, there's of course a lot less privacy protection in China, individual privacy protection, but in practice, the way it plays out is very much fragmented. So it's very much depending on where you're located inside China and what kind of system. So for example, the social credit system in China is currently still voluntary. So depending on which company scheme you buy in, you would be surveyed by a different company, and you don't have to. So it really, it's a bit more, I would say, nuanced than it's usually perceived outside of China. But of course, compared to Europe, certainly, Max has been talking about GDPR. Of course, individual users in China are not protected by a rule of law system, and also have much less security in terms of the implications. And I think Jingjing also pointed to a very important other aspect of this. So I've done research on Chinese users and how Chinese users, for example, see the social credit system. And so to my great surprise, actually, Chinese users are much more supportive than I would have thought of the system, and we're looking into why. And our current best response is that convenience trumps privacy. And I wonder whether also Yuuki perhaps can talk about that relationship between convenience and privacy. But Chinese users are no different, I would say, than American users or European users. That oftentimes, when you're faced to make a decision either to protect your privacy or to go for the most convenient solution, in practice, users tend to go for the most convenient solution. So if you don't have a state regulatory system that sort of protects people's privacies, I think the natural user tendency will usually go for convenience.
Well, that is a little bit questionable. I'm not so sure whether Chinese environment is completely comparable to Western. But I have another issue, Dani. If we look at the complexity of data which go into the social crediting from a CSCW point of view, we would very much doubt that the credits which are calculated finally would be very valuable, because they would be probably arbitrarily coming together from different sources. They cannot be, the results will not always be meaningful. And do we know something about the way how the surfacing of this data in government action or in regulatory action, how that is playing out in these 8 example cases you spoke about? Do we know how they work, how they function?
So that's an excellent question. I don't know of any research that reverse engineers the algorithms. So we don't know very much about how the social credit scores are calculated, despite some general information provided, let's say for Sesame Credit. But we know what users make of it. And so Chinese users perceive these systems as much more easy sources to obtain loans compared to traditional banks. And this, of course, has huge implications, because then these companies, especially Alibaba, but also Jingjing mentioned, WeChat is, of course, run by Tencent. These companies start to function as an alternative to mostly state-owned banks in China. That gives them an enormous power, financial power as well.
Interesting. Yeah.
Volker, we have a couple of more questions, and having one eye on the clock,
Yeah.
We see we have only 5 minutes left.
Yeah.
So we have like 2 interconnected questions that also touch a little bit on what you were saying, maybe with regard to accountability and transparency of the calculation in this regard to the social crediting system. And one, let's say, participant believes that there's often still a great discrepancy between the sometimes rather crude actions taken on data and the very fine-grained and detailed data collection, for example, on online behavioral advertising. Yeah, you have a lot of data that's being collected and you sometimes still get very, very crude suggestions. Or in HR analytics, sometimes you have very detailed tracking of employees, but still decisions are still being negotiated person to person. So the level of data that's being collected and the outcomes that are being calculated for this person has kind of a mismatch. And then second, kind of connected to this, is the question, what about the issue of transparency per se? So one of the problems is that we have to take the statements of companies at face value, what they are doing with the data. They are saying they are doing certain things with the data, like encryption or use. And what means could we have to validate that their software platforms or algorithms are actually working the way they say they do?
That's close to our earlier discussion. Yuuki, since you know a lot about your software engineers, do you want to comment on the way data turn into certain functionality and the precision and the problems probably with data quality? How's that from your experience looking into your engineers' work?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, first of all, actually in my company there's a lot of data analytics engineer, but they are not human factors specialists. So what I mean is they know how to fetch the data, but they are not necessarily analyzing the data in right way, or they are not necessarily putting the right goals or objective. So actually they make a mistake without intention, not intentionally. So I just want to make some comment about like Facebook and Google's as well. I have talked with friends in Silicon Valley and stuff like that, but probably my guess is that people who come up with a service idea business model in Silicon Valley, like Facebook or Google's, they are not intended to make some services or business models that manipulate people or mislead the people or even like doing hidden action, but somehow they ended up like this. I think that's the really like important point about this issue. Maybe they didn't know what is coming on at the end. So that's exactly why we have to work together, the CSCW people or the people like me, like ECSCW in company or whatever. We have to work with engineers.
Yeah, definitely, yeah, and I think these business models have developed over years, and they were not thought out from the beginning, but somehow they are scary. So if I listen to you carefully, then the quality of what can be calculated is probably pretty varied. But still, it's nervous making, even if the quality is bad. But it has, for instance, the effect whether you can buy a train ticket or not, or whether you get a credit or not. Or at least I understand that in the vision, at least, of the social crediting system, this would be some of the implications.
But one more point, just a little bit quick comment. Like as a manufacturer, like for example, we have 100 years making infrastructure solutions, a train, power plant and stuff like that. So we know that we can make the product that would not harm people, that would not do bad things to the people. But in data analytics world, it's only like 20 years old, maybe more, something like that. So we do not know where the risks are, how to avoid it. So we do not make train that actually kills a lot of people, because if we do that, we're going to be out of business in the long term. So you know what I mean. So
yeah, that's a very nice point for the almost a nice finishing point. But I would like to hand over to Lance, because Lance, you want to finish up a little bit with our discussion?
What an interesting discussion. You know, my feeling is that I like very much your last points about maybe we've ended up in a place that no one really imagined or really intended to end up, and that's kind of scary in a way, because we've ended up in a place that is really emphasizing the wrong human values if you want to protect life on the planet. I mean, it's really a basic question, it seems to me. And to try and expand consumerism at a point when it's already threatening our life support capacities, that's something that we might want to focus on in terms of both the intentions of the design and the engineering, but also in terms of the education of users and citizens about the directions we're going. But it seems to me that while there are lots of schemes that would make a difference, such as allowing you to buy back your data and prevent your data from being used, which would create, if we educate people in terms of the value of that and the price that they might want to pay for that, which could be regulated, of course. We don't need to let the market establish these values. Then you would probably create enough holes in the data networks that the companies couldn't continue to use their current models. So it seems to me that we simply want to limit that, but at the same time we want to create a vision of a world that is more positive, where these technologies could actually be put to better human use. So it seems to me that COVID is an interesting moment in history where the economy is not going to recover, and it's not going to recover in particularly important ways. So the service sector, the low wage sector, the hotels, the restaurants, which employ a large percentage of populations, are not going to look the same after COVID. And that presents an interesting challenge of what kind of economy do we want to have?
Yeah.
And I think we want to have an economy that invests more in social services, housing, health, of course, and other features. So we might want to also think about a positive model to communicate in this time of opportunity.
Yeah. Lance, thank you very much. Thank you everybody for this really thoughtful, very interesting topic. It was very, very nice discussion. And I think the theme of this panel will stay with us because there is, from my point of view, from the activist point of view of me, there's really something to be done to maintain, as you finished, Lance, a sort of convivial, human-centered, acceptable, normatively acceptable society. Thank you all for staying with us up to the very end, waking up early, staying long with us. Thank you very much, and see you very soon. And I hope we will have a time coming up soon where we will sit together and have a beer and go on with this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Volker, and thanks all panel participants. It is time for a short break, just to make sure that we run the conference on time and have everything set up for the later sessions. We would please ask you to come back in 5 minutes, if possible, for the second papers and notes session. And then we will go from there. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.